my name's Saer, obviously, and I use they and he pronouns. I was raised in mostly rural Florida, but rural anywhere. I'm an Army brat, so definitely curious about some of the differences in experiences and similarities in experiences between young people when I was growing up and young people now. I think there's probably a lot more in common with folks growing up rurally related to how I was as a kid, but it's the same kind of lack of resources and people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm a social worker, and I just graduated from Smith School for Social Work, which is kind of a big deal to me anyway. And yeah.
So, the first few questions are kind of more general. And the first one that I wanted to ask you was, what do queer and trans kids and youth need from their communities?
That's a good question. I don't know, when I think about myself as like a queer kid, I think what I was really missing from my community was role models and like open support. Like even just a few folks around that provided like were openly supportive of who I was as a person made a huge difference. And like I grew up in really rural Florida, and we didn't have no one talked about it. There was no um, LGBT club at school. There was no discussion of like homosexuality or transgender or anything like that in my community. And so like folks knew in a very kind of underground way, but not in a visible way. And so folks kind of had to find each other. And I think it would have been really helpful if I'd had folks that were like role modeling what it looked like to be an adult that was queer. Because it wasn't until I was in college that I met I met a lesbian couple that had been married for many years and like could see like what stable adulthood might look like. Or like I met a trans person that had been living their identity for a very long time. And I think that that makes a huge difference for kids in those communities and in those communities to kind of provide spaces for that. Because I know you probably know this, but the research really says that like the more role models that kids have that reflect who they are, the better they do. And so as long as communities are not talking about it or not providing that stuff, then kids are still having to figure it out for themselves.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you. So, what do queer and trans kids and youth bring to their communities?
Creativity and support. I think one of the coolest things about queer community is kind of by the nature of not having what you need, that means that you create it within your own community. And so that's the coolest thing I see with queer community is like community kids are bringing support for each other, and then that spreads out to the wider community. Because when kids are like, well, I don't have access to these things that I need, and then they create it for themselves and then they create it for other people. And I think it's just sharing that that support that they need widely. It's kind of crazy cool how that happens, but it does wherever you are.
Yeah. Also, your cat is really cute. I just saw in the background. I love cats. I love them so much.
I love that he's just sitting there. This is little man, by the way.
Hi, little man.
He uses all the pronouns.
All right.
Hi.
Cute kitty.
Now he's gonna want to.
All right, back on topic. What would you say to well-meaning adults in the community who are new to thinking about gender and sexuality and aren't sure what to do or say?
That if you're too worried about saying it wrong, then you'll say it wrong. That like if I think what folks more often need is folks to try and to like put their heart into getting it right and wanting to be supportive. And I think it's one of those moments where intention matters a hell of a lot. And so the more I don't know, like you're going to get it wrong. You're not going to understand pieces of gender or sexuality because if it's not part of your life, of course you're not going to understand it. And I think that most people can get that. But what makes a difference is when you're trying to get it right and trying to understand and be supportive.
Yeah. No, I think that the intention is really huge because, if you have that intention, you're more likely to take the initiative to learn and the initiative to grow and the initiative to, work toward learning more and getting things right, even if that's not a part of your experience yet.
Folks can tell, like, I can tell if someone is trying or not. Like, I can tell if someone got it wrong because they're trying, but they made a mistake versus someone who got it wrong because they just don't care. And I
Yeah.
think that teens in particular are so freaking smart. Like they are like cued into social behavior stuff where like they know when someone's lying and tricking them and leading them on or like just not doesn't care. I think that there's something going on with our brains at that age.
Don't underestimate young people. Like, they know.
You can't lie to a teenager. That's
No. Aw.
woke the beast.
How would you support queer and trans youth who may not be out to their parents?
I think that's the hardest thing because I think it comes down to safety first. That like, sorry for the hissing cats in the background.
Okay.
But it comes down to support, and so like support and safety. So I'm not one of those people that believes that everyone needs to come out right now in any way. I think that's a very individual, personal
Oh
decision.
yeah, absolutely.
It's like really based on your safety and support that you have around you. So like if it's not safe to come out to your parents, are there places that are safe to explore that you do find supportive, encouraging people that can let you kind of figure out where you fit and feel safe in exploring your sexuality and your gender identity and whatever else kind of
Yeah.
away from your parents, and then finding ways to survive. I think a lot of folks, a lot of queer kids end up finding ways to cope that are maybe damaging. So like, I mean, to be very blunt, like drugs, alcohol, um, uh, unsafe sex, self-harm, eating disorders, suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety, all of these things are like really common in the queer community because of how folks are trying to cope with what they're dealing with. And so I think the more community that you do find that's supportive, the less that you'll need to access other coping mechanisms, because those coping mechanisms make sense, but they're just not helpful for you in the long run.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. But
It does. Yeah, and I mean this is also like something that you can see with statistics, but it's in some ways it's really just common sense. If people have more support, from their loved ones, from their communities, I think it is a really big factor in whether people are using unsafe coping skills, like whether they really have the support that they need.
we need that support is like folks that you can ask for help from, is more like as you're figuring out this stuff that can be really painful when you're in an environment that says that this isn't okay. Um, you need people around you that you can say, "Hey, am I okay?" Like,
Yeah, definitely.
and people that say, "Yes, you are okay, just the way you are."
Yeah, that really helped me. Having those people for me, I think, allowed me to stop like suppressing my identity within myself and not even thinking about it. And I was just so much happier when I
Yeah,
was able to not do that anymore. And the reason I wasn't doing that is because I saw there were people like me who would support me. Um, and there was a pretty significant stretch of time in my life when I just wasn't seeing that, and I think it's that way for a lot of people.
yeah. I wish that I'd found that when I was younger.
Yeah.
I think that it makes it so that you can figure that stuff out maybe faster and find yourself settling into who you are a lot younger.
Yeah. So I did want to ask a couple questions about media representation. The first one being, where do you see positive representations of queer and trans people in TV or film?
Well, I'm obsessed with Pose right now. Have you seen Pose yet?
I have seen a little bit of Pose. It is really good.
Well,
I need to watch all of it. I have a lot going on TV wise and life wise.
add it to your list. Like, holy heck.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. No, I started watching part of it for like a TV class I was in, and I actually hadn't known about it until then, and I was like, "Oh wow."
It was
You're
not
not
what
the
I
first person to
expected.
have mentioned it either, and that's not surprising to me at all because it is really good.
Like, I mean, I looked at it and I was like, I don't know. I thought it was going to be something way different, but it's like it is the first show I've seen that, like, dear God, it like tells a story of like young trans folk, um, and like in a very very real way, and it has like trans actors
Yeah.
throughout, and I think that the difference, like, holy crap, if I had had, yeah, something like that, um, that like even as an adult, like I'm 32 years old and watching a show where like they're talking about like the deep experiences of figuring out your identity like that, and I'm just like bawling. So I love that show. I'm not through it yet and I'm still loving it. So yeah, the more things like that there are out there. I know that kids shows are doing it now too, which I love. Like, it's not like a big um oh my god, they have a non-binary character in this show thing so much anymore, because there's enough of that that it's not front page news, which I love and I'm hoping helps.
Yeah. No, unfortunately, there is like a lot of controversy with doing that in kids shows, which there really shouldn't be at all. But it is. I'm glad that a lot of it, because I know that there has been like a lot of fear of like the backlash from that, but recently I feel like most of the responses have been more positive, and there are companies who are producing this content, and it's really helpful to people to be able to see that at a young age.
Yeah, and hopefully over time folks will realize that it's providing examples for kids um, to see and to understand and be more accepting, but that like it's not like spreading the contagion of gender diversity or something. It's just providing it's like being racially and ethnically diverse on a TV show. It matters.
Yeah, no, people need to see themselves represented on TV, and people also need to see people who like white people, straight people need to see people who don't look like them on TV from a young age.
And I think, I don't know, there's a tendency for folks, for all of us, to like surround ourselves with what we understand.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
but that doesn't necessarily move us towards like being better humans.
No, I mean it really, if you're only surrounding yourself with what you're comfortable with, that's not really gonna like help like doing work towards removing systemic barriers and inequities. So yeah, this is all really important. So my other media question was, where do you see positive representations of queer and trans people in kids and youth books?
Ooh, I really want more. Um, I wish I had a list of examples. I read primarily young adult fiction, honestly, because they're the best stories. But I'm struggling to find examples. I really liked Tamara Pierce because I think that was the first author that I'd ever found that included trans characters, and it was huge, and had gay characters, and it was like Tamara Pierce started writing back in the 90s, and so during my childhood, and I was like, oh my god, this is like the best thing, to find like a main character um, that's gay, or like she has some characters where like it's a fantasy world, so she describes like how they were born into the wrong body, um, as a result of something with their god, like were tricked, and like it, the way that was weaved into the story was like beautiful, and also was like a great way to describe the experience of being transgender, or at least my experience of being transgender. And so god, Tamara Pierce, but but not so up on the newer authors that are doing it. I just know that they are.
Yeah, you're actually like the second person we've talked to who says that they read primarily young adult fiction, and I feel like that says a lot about the direction that it's going, that like adults are reading it and enjoying it and getting a lot out of it. I feel like young adult fiction has really been evolving these days, and it has been evolving to include, like more expansive, more inclusive, more diverse narratives.
Yeah,
Um
or real stories.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I should probably start reading young adult fiction again, honestly. I was, when I was that age, I mean, I really liked some of it. Some of it I was less impressed with, but I've been hearing like positive things about what's been coming out lately. So,
Yeah, I think I often just read whatever the like top recommended on the list, that of like, I don't know, LGBT fiction, or like um Black voices, or whatever it is, so that like I think because I work with teenagers, I want to stay connected to like the emotional experience, and like um the stories of what's going on in folks' lives.
absolutely. So, can you talk a little bit about your work?
Yeah, I'm a just graduated therapist, working with young people primarily, and so I guess relevant to this conversation, my work has accidentally included a lot of work with rural trans kids, or with trans kids generally, because even if the agency is like, we're not giving you all the trans kids just because you're trans, we're just, you would work well with them. But like, honestly, I think I'm okay with that, because of the I think I fell into role modeling that I didn't expect or necessarily feel comfortable with, but A lot of my work is just in being alongside folks as they're figuring out where they fit with their gender and sexuality, um, and kind of like role modeling being yourself in like its entirety, in its like goofy, weird awkwardness. Because I think it's a lot of pressure um, to figure that stuff out, and a lot of kids are figuring it out alone. And so I think I don't know. When I had my first therapist that was transgender, it changed my life, to like have someone to speak to that really understood, and like had not just understood my experience, but like could understand all different ways of approaching it. Um, Absolutely biggest thing ever. And so I just think that there should be more trans
Yeah,
therapists and queer therapists, especially for kids.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, having a therapist who can really relate to your experiences, it's life changing. You know,
It's just someone that you can like see in front of you that's like, this is real. This is an adult.
yeah.
Even though teens can do everything themselves, they don't need adults.
Hmm. Yeah, but it is nice to see that. You know, it is nice to see, you know, people like you who are adults, you know, living their lives and succeeding, especially when you feel like you won't be able to. I mean, it's really important to have that kind of role model.
Because there's
But yeah, teens are great. They can really do everything. Ugh,
but we all get stuck in this like, can't imagine what my future is going to look like, so that means I don't have one.
yeah,
Which is common for any teenager, but especially for ones that like have no ability to picture what their future might look like.
yeah. So my next question is, what do you wish that you had learned as a kid or youth about gender and sexuality that you didn't learn until later?
Everything. I don't know I'm curious what your experience was like, but like I grew up in a very um, conservative, very evangelical Christian kind of environment where like any talk about sex and sexuality and gender was like very, this is how it is and this is the only way it is, and everything outside of that is not okay. And so like my I think even just understanding that there were different options for what families look like, for what relationships look like, for what sex is, uh, for what gender can do, and how you can wear your gender. I think all of that stuff took until after college for me to have exposure to, because I was in that environment where like these are the only options. And so like just generally comprehensive sexual education, really useful stuff. Or like um, exposure to and like permission to explore other ways of living. Um,
So you said you wanted to hear about my experience? All right. So I guess if someone asked me this question, probably what I would answer is, and this is something I wish I'd known as like a kid would be great because I think all children should be aware of this, but like when I really started needing it was like as a preteen, learning that a lot more people were queer than I thought. I thought that was really rare. When I started thinking of that I might be, I was just really scared because I had encountered like, you know, a lot of homophobia like like socially within the people in my class, and I just really thought I would be alone
Yeah.
and that I wouldn't have anybody to support me. And then it would just be because I'd already like been bullied in school, and I was like, I'm just gonna suppress this because I don't want another thing to be bullied about. I'm just gonna like forget that that this is like possibly a part of my identity. And then it was when I went to high school and like realized that there were actually a lot of other people that I started thinking about that again, and then that I realized that I really was. So well, that was my experience. So that's what I would have said. Yeah, like the Upper Valley it's not a conservative area at all. I mean, there are like in Vermont, even though it's not a conservative state, there are like a few like pockets. But
Mhm.
I don't live in one of those like pockets. But I think there's a big difference between a place where people like where the majority of people believe that it's okay to be queer and it's okay to be trans. There's a big difference between that and people actually actively supporting you and people actually calling out homophobia and transphobia where they see it. There's
And
a huge
creating a better environment. Yeah.
yeah. And I certainly would have had a much worse time if I was growing up in an environment where it was actively shunned. But I think we can do better than just people saying, yeah, sure, I'm fine with this in theory. I'm not going to do anything. But like, and I'm not saying that's what everybody here is like. There are a lot of really great people, but I really think that we need more of that to succeed in our communities.
I think when I hear you talk, it's like I just think about how lonely it is. Like, I knew a handful of other queer folks growing up, and we were all really um, quiet about it. We just knew about each other because it was so, um, it felt so unspeakable, um, and so lonely, I guess. It's like, even if the environment around you says that it's supportive, um, but isn't demonstrating that, it's like that's telling you that you have to figure it out for yourself, and that like you have to figure it out in secret and in silence. And I think that that's how so many things kind of breed under the surface, where we're just, how can we believe that we are like worthwhile, good people, amazing people, if like we're having to silence so much of ourselves, to those around us. Like, just think about that a lot.
All right. Yeah, definitely. This is really, yeah. So, and we're kind of getting into more specific questions now, and one that I think, would be a really good transition and also something that you could definitely have, quite a bit of insight about is how might queer trans youth in rural areas have different needs than in cities? And how can rural areas be supportive places for queer and trans youth and adults?
I guess I think the big difference is in terms of like what resources are available. Um, in a city, um, there are shelters for kids that get kicked out of home. There are, every night of the week, you can probably find a support group or like a hangout spot where other queer or trans kids are at. Um, and that's a lot harder to find in rural areas. And so I guess I think of two things where like, um, if the community itself is more supportive, like if you're wherever the community is, so your community center or the library, which was the hangout in my tiny town, had like spaces to create, like created spaces for folks to find that support. Um, I think that makes a difference. I don't know if that answered the question, but
Yeah, and I think so.
I think just resources, creating pockets of support and creating like intentional groups of people that are like, I'm willing to create a space in the library for kids who are queer to just be, um, and be safe.
Absolutely. That is so important. I mean, that you're not the first person to have mentioned spaces, but when you talked about it in the context of rural areas, yeah, like a lot of times hangout places are places like libraries. There aren't necessarily going to be designated hangout places for queer and trans people, but the general hangout spaces need to cultivate a culture that where everyone feels welcome.
Yeah, because word spreads. I'm sure you know this. Like you
Oh yeah.
find the places. And so the more intentional places there are that are created, the more likely that the kids that need it will find it.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I spent my childhood hanging out at the library, and I did not have the most supportive parents. But you know what? My parents had no idea what was going on at the library because it's the library.
Yeah.
So I could do a lot of exploration and figuring myself and things out.
Yeah. My parents are definitely supportive. I was very fortunate in that, but I felt like something that I was I feel like I was still lacking resources, because I wanted places to go like where there were more other queer people. And I did have friends who were, but I feel like specific resources would have been helpful too.
Yeah. And visible things. Like I didn't realize that this was a huge need until I had a client that had moved to the Northampton area from a really rural area of Massachusetts, and um, and was like ecstatic, like through the like moon about like the fact that Northampton has rainbow walkways, and that there are rainbow flags everywhere. And we'd be driving through town, and they'd be like, a rainbow flag, a trans flag, oh my god. And like their only goal in life was like, I want to walk across this rainbow walkway, because like that's like to be in a place that's that supportive visually, made a huge difference. And I had no idea that that was like so special, to that kid. But so I guess visibility is huge. Like when you grow up somewhere where they don't have rainbow flags anywhere, they don't have visible, it's safe here signs. And then to come to a place where it's like, oh, it's safe here.
I think the Upper Valley is doing that really well, actually. Like there's a lot of rainbow flags. There's rainbow flags on all the churches, which is really cool.
That's cool.
But yeah, no, I think that's important. I do wish we had a rainbow walkway though. That would be really cool.
Yeah,
But yeah, there is.
picturing that Beatles cover with a bunch of queer kids walking across the rainbow crosswalk.
Yeah.
That would be fun. This is a slightly different track than where you're headed, but like I grew up like dirt poor, and so I think that the experience of growing up in like extreme poverty, also shifts your experience of like gender and sexual identity, because like um, rich kids that have more access to resources, maybe have more access to resources generally. I don't actually know if that's true though. I think I can only speak from my own experience, which is that like as a poor queer person, that means that like my need to support my family is really high. And so like I have to suppress my queerness a little bit more than your middle class person because my family needs me. And it just gets really complicated.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you're talking about that, because I mean, like, intersectionality is definitely something that we want to highlight in these videos, and so that's an important perspective. Yeah, because I mean, it is a really good point, and a lot of the resources I can think of that exist around here and that exist a lot of places, like camps, like those cost money, and sometimes it's quite a bit of money. It's so like having resources that are free, that are accessible is really important.
Yeah. And like, because it's like a mix of like, can someone afford it, and also like, is this something that folks can go to even if their parents are not like supportive of that?
Yeah, because I had there was a resource. I'm not gonna like say what it was in case it's something anybody's heard of, but that it was presented more as like just like a dance or like a music event, but it was like actually particularly to support queer and trans people.
Yeah.
And it was free, and they had free food, and I think having things like that are going to be a lot more accessible to a lot more populations.
Yeah, for sure. God, I have so many ideas of things I dream of being able to create, because I think that there's a lot of need out there.
You want to talk about that? I think that would be great, like things that you'd want to create.
I mean, yeah, I guess my biggest thing that I really want is like the creation of those spaces that kids need, and of like it's really overused, this like idea of mentors or whatever. I really hate that word, but I really love that idea. Like for me, when I was a teenager, I had she actually wasn't queer, but she was really supportive. I had a friend of the family that like was my rock through this really hard time. And so like she answered the phone 24/7 whenever I needed to talk. And she like showed up in any and every way that she could for me. And like, I don't know how I would have made it through my teenage years without having someone like that. And so like, that's not exactly a mentor, but that's like having access to adults that want to be that person for you is huge. And having access to like spaces with other adults that like want to create a space where you can like literally just be. I kind of have a vision one day of having just a queer teen house with like anything that any kind of resources that kids want and ask for, because I think there's a lot that y'all are figuring out that I never even would have thought of, but now I'm like, okay, that's cool. But
Yeah, that's actually another thing people have brought up, is that like queer kids now are thinking of so many new creative things, and that's it is a real strength of our community, and particularly of young people in our community, because I don't know, like young people are so creative anyway, and I think young people in the queer community are really creative, particularly.
Yeah, because I think especially like the creativity is towards like, how can we make the world better for each other?
Exactly.
It doesn't tend to be like, how can we be bigger bullies or something? Like, it's like, how can we show this person that they're loved, and like accommodate their needs around like neurodivergence and their like racial identity and their sexual identity, and make sure that this space meets all of their needs instead of just one, which is really cool. So like
Yeah.
bringing kids on board and have them tell me what to do.
Yeah. Definitely. So, is there anything else that you'd like to tell us? This can really go anywhere on the topic. It's generally what we ask people at the end, because sometimes you know our questions are not going to cover everything, and a lot of times because there is sort of more specific list of questions, and we will ask people the ones that we think would match up with either their personal or work experience. But people may have other perspectives that we don't necessarily know about. So
Yeah, for sure. I'm not sure. I guess I'm thinking about like the one thing we didn't get to talk about was kind of the role of the internet in providing support for folks, and resources and access and anything and everything. I think the internet was just starting to boom when I was growing up, and like made a huge difference for me in accessing other perspectives, other people, people that cared. And so I'm really hoping that, like, I know that I don't understand that, and that's huge and happening. And so I'm hoping that teens are working towards creating spaces, virtual spaces, especially with COVID, where they can connect and feel supported and be safe. So,
yeah,
it's a lot.
it is. There are a lot of internet-based resources, which is important because they're not tied to location, although they are tied to having internet access.
Which is a lot more problematic than folks are aware of.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially rural. Holy crap. Sorry, I'm like, we didn't have power anytime it rained, so I'm sure that there are other people that have that kind of, like, I live so far out on a dirt road that, like, I can't even get to town when there's a big storm or something.
Yeah. Yeah, no, our power goes out a fair amount, and I feel like there's other places where people have generators, or they live in buildings that have generators, or they live somewhere where Wi-Fi is more easily accessible, or even in a building where it's provided. And there's multiple issues with that. There's the affordability and there's the location, because the internet is just not as good around here. And there's like kind of the basic options are not really reliable, and like really the best options that you can get around here are not the same as the best options in other places. Because I really like living in a rural area, but there are definitely downsides, and that's one of the reasons why we really need community support, is because some of the resources that would be available to us if we lived elsewhere are not. So we really need to create a community that really it sounds weird to say fosters community after I just said the word community, but
I mean, I would want, I think my hope for things for kids these days, especially kids without those access to resources, is to, like, I'm hoping that the shift in, like, the world that's happening is making it so that less kids are having to kind of live in isolation with their experience. because I'm a firm believer in relationships, and that like our ability to um get to where we want to get in our lives is tied to our relationships with other people and the support that we have around us and the number of people we have that believe in us. And so I'm just really hopeful that things are moving in a direction where people don't feel as isolated wherever they are, and that they can create or find pockets of support and like a positive environment. And that's so cliche, but it's also true.
It
Uh,
is. That's what I hope for too.
this is a step in the right direction.